Very good afternoon. Before I start, there seems to be some communication gap regarding the topic per se. The topic is as flashed, and the views which I'll be expressing are my personal. They have nothing to do with USI, the organization which I am working for as a researcher, Indian Air Force to which I belong, and neither the Government of India. And whatever I am expressing is as a result of my academic pursuit, so it should be taken at that level. To start with, I am presenting today's subject under the following heads. Before I come to the topic per se, I would like to bring to the notice power transition theory, which was propounded by A.F.K. Organsky in his book World Politics, published in 1958. It is a theory about the cyclical nature of war in relation to power in the international relations. I would like to quote him: "An even distribution of political, economic and military capabilities between contending groups of states is likely to increase the probability of war. Peace is preserved best when there is an imbalance of national capabilities between a disadvantaged and advantaged nations. The aggressor will come from a small group of dissatisfied strong countries, and it is the weaker rather than the stronger power that is most likely to be the aggressor." Unquote. So this perhaps shows a connect between how cyclically wars take place, and maybe in the coming century, in coming decades, Indo-China, US-China, they might be moving towards this direction, as it was discussed earlier in the morning session and brought out by General Anil Chet. Coming to my topic per se, I would start it with ex-President Hu Jintao of PRC, the President. I quote, "The future and destiny of contemporary China is more closely linked to the future and destiny of the world. China's development cannot be done without the world, and the world's development needs China." Unquote. This quote itself is clear indication what Chinese think about themselves, the self-confidence which is accrued as a result of their economic power. Taking a view of Chinese so-called peaceful rise, and what is the impact? Today, China is economically strong. It has more than $3 trillion of foreign reserve. They have resulted into a frantic pace of modernization of their PLA. They are a nuclear power to reckon with, but then the latest defense white paper of 2013 has an ambiguous miss of their no first use policy. They have carried out asset tests. Their modernization of submarine fleet is on. They have got stealth capability now. The aircraft carrier is almost operational, and it's sailing to further locations than their shores. There is a positive and a strong military build-up in Tibet Autonomous Region, which is focused primarily against India, and also the shifting core interest which has accrued as a result of their economic might. When I say shifting core interest, in Indian context, the differences were of the demarcation of border in three segments, that is Ladakh, Himachal and East. But now this shifting core of interest has given them a perspective that the whole of Arunachal and major chunk of Tibet is, Ladakh is theirs. This has to be linked with the shifting pivot. The peaceful rise made China, no doubt, economic power, technologically strong and militarily capable. As a result, today they have a worldwide economic reach. At least the military reach would follow now. The other aspect is their middle kingdom syndrome, wherein once Chinese were very powerful, and now that the economic might has come up, they are trying to revive. As a result, perhaps President Obama got in his Pacific pivot, wherein they want to encircle and contain China's rise. This containment has to be counterbalanced, and as a result, there are disturbances and this disturbance are much more visibly seen in Asia, and rather Asia Pacific. Today, Asia Pacific has become a region with intense economic, military and diplomatic activities. It's a region with intense competition. This competition is leading to confrontation. If we have a view of the South China Sea and East China Sea, it is apparent that there are clashes of interest between China and Japan over Diaoyu or Senkaku Islands, China Vietnam, China Philippines, China Brunei, Malaysia, Taiwan. They all are maritime differences wherein everybody is trying to lay claims which perceivedly is theirs. And in Indian context, we have the territorial differences, and the latest was visible in April when we had 15 days long siege. Depicting the South China Sea and East China Sea, this is the area, though the map is not to the scale or very bad, but the idea was to just show the Chinese claim also has reached now Okinawa, wherein they say it is part of Onkyu territory, so it should get back to China. And this is the show of strength. At times when the Japanese reach the Senkaku Island, they flag it, and vice versa by China. And this is our own very Ladakh. The Chinese are intruding, and thereafter they are showing us flags. You have crossed the border, please go back. And then the famous 410 strategy, which took the nation almost to ransom and spoiled the relationship on the verge that the PM's visit was also likely to be cancelled. Putting this together is attributable to the rise of China, and then I link it up with the Chinese philosophy of modern war, that is, winning before fighting. And this is possible by gaining information advantage in war through application of space technologies, which will be made possible by the satellites and other space assets, primarily the C4I2SR. I will now quote General Fu Quanyu, the Chief of General Staff, People's Liberation Army, who way back 20 Feb 1999 quoted, I quote, "The space of operation becomes all-dimensional and military action will be conducted simultaneously in many fields, on land, in the air, in outer space and the electronic field." So in 1999 itself, the Chinese leadership started planning for cyber war as well as war in space. And they have started working. Now what we see is the fructification of their projects. I will restrict myself to weaponization part, because if I indulge into militarization, then the scope and the time would be quite great. And to start the weaponization per se, efforts were on, but it was only on 11th January 2007 that the Chinese discreetly carried out their first successful anti-satellite test, wherein they shot down their own defunct weather satellite FY-1C by using a ballistic missile. It raised a furor in the world community because the kind of debris it created. Thereafter, again in 2010, they revalidated this ASAT technology, but this time in mid-course interception. And as late as 13th May 2013, it has been reported that China fired rockets capable of targeting satellites in high Earth orbit and middle orbit as well. The rocket is supposed to have lifted off from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center and reached 6,200 miles altitude. This is very high altitude where we can have our GEO and GSO satellites operating. And this was claimed that there is the highest suborbital flight in 37 years by Jonathan McDowell, the Harvard Smithsonian Center of Astrophysics. He says that these missile systems are capable of delivering an ASAT weapon in MEO and HEO orbits. In his words, I quote, "This Chinese rocket was a ground-based missile that we believe would be their first test on an interceptor that would be designed to go after a satellite that's actually on orbit," unquote. The other Chinese space programs which are focused on weaponization of space, apart from KKE, that is what I explained earlier, are laser ASATs, co-orbital ASATs, wherein a satellite itself is used to counter another satellite on a counter orbit and using proxy fuse blows when it comes closer. Ballistic missiles of high reach, manipulation of satellite, network attack, broad spectrum and narrow frequency jamming of satellites, space mining. Nowadays, from micro to nano to pico satellites have been developed, which are quite capable to be mined in space on a desired trajectory or orbit and explode when requirement is there. EMP assets, and the last, that is Tiangong-1, the spaceship which has a utility for military base. This picture fascinates me, and because of my fascination I am unable to get rid of it. The blue box which is visible on Shenzhou spaceship 7 is a microsatellite BX-1, and the testing and maneuverability has been proven to use it as a co-orbital satellite. Now, what are the implications for India? The strategic perspective, threat to national security, yes. Likelihood of Asian space race, no, because I don't feel India's space program has matured enough to counter China. Tactically, the Chinese weapons are threat to space assets, yes. Space, therefore, whether we realize it or not, has started to play an increasingly important role in military planning and operations. It is the ultimate high ground and RMA in 21st century. What are the options for India thereafter? To me, militarization and weaponization. In fact, they both have to go simultaneously. When I say militarization, we are aware that right from Cold War period, militarization of space has been an ongoing activity for the purpose which even the Indian space program has drifted slowly from purely societal activities for welfare of the masses to a bit of dual use, that is militaristic values on ISR, secure military communication, early warning, navigation and positioning, targeting for precision weapons delivery, surveying and mapping for military operations, radar imaging for surveillance, meteorological support for tactical operations. Then why weaponization? The Indian space program has been mainly for developing civilian space applications. However, China's aggressive posturing against India now necessitates that it should be review of the security implications of our space assets and development of space weapons to protect them should be factored in. China now is working on informationalized warfare. As a result, its dependency on satellite-based technologies will grow exponentially. Hence, perhaps in our scheme of things, as a part of asymmetric gain, Indian asset will be the most potent weapon for deterrence against China. I'd like to quote Dr. Saraswat, the head of DRDO, who briefed reporters on January 2010. I quote, "India is putting together building blocks of technology that could be used to neutralize enemy satellites. We are working to ensure space security and protect our satellites. At the same time, we are also working on how to deny enemy access to its space assets." Unquote. That means the inferences could be drawn that though we don't have a fixed program, but then the technology exists, and if there is a requirement, we can move ahead in that direction. So here he makes the case for an Indian asset weapon. Coming to necessity and urgency, the impending Chinese threat of various kinds, be it the land borders, be it the maritime, necessitates a credible deterrence. Having tested their asset capabilities, there is a threat to our huge satellite bases, wherein they have been the engines for economic development in India. They will be at risk. Hence, in my perspective, weaponization is inescapable for India towards securing its national interest. And asset weapons are the only way ahead for India to gain this asymmetric advantage over China. Since the availability of technology is there in terms of Agni 5 missile, which has been tested, this will be for asset role, and there are maneuverable satellites which could be used perhaps for co-orbital bombardment. Agni 5 indeed has been a game changer for development of Indian assets. In the words of Dr. Saraswat again, I quote, Agni 5's launch has ushered in fantastic opportunities in building asset weapons and launching nano/micro satellites on demand, unquote. ASAT would include marrying Agni's 5 propulsion system with the kill vehicle of advanced air defense of the successful two-tier missile defense system. Since ASAT it requires to reach an altitude of 800 kilometers, this will be provided by the Agni system, and a kill vehicle in form of advanced air defense will do the job of blasting the target satellite. However, Dr. Saraswat did comment that India will not test ASAT capability through destruction of a satellite so as to avoid space debris. The ASAT capability would be fine-tuned through simulated electronic tests. As a result, India can escape a lot of wrath to come on account of proliferation or spreading of debris. Thus, visible deterrence, it seems, is the most credible deterrence, and in Indian parlance, even if we have to test a ASAT by shooting down a satellite, the shooting in a low Earth orbit, it is a feasible option. On lines what was done by the US in 2008, immediately after the Chinese ASAT test to revalidate its own ASAT capability, wherein they used the Aegis missile defense system to shoot down one of their unserviceable satellite, USA 193. The pretext given was that this satellite contains almost 10 liters of very highly poisonous hydrogen fuel, which, if it comes in contact with Earth, will be very, very poisonous for the populace. So they blasted the satellite and revalidated the missile system. And then coming to the urgency, to me and to the world, space debris are a matter of concern. As a result, the European Union in 2008 proposed for a code of conduct for the outer space. In June 2010, US indicated proposing a new treaty for restrictions on space-based weapons. EU sponsored code of conduct in 2012 after its review to UN, and as of now, this is being debated by a group of government experts and is likely to be ratified in 2013 or 14. This code of conduct is seen as a precursor for a restrictive regime for ASAT weapons. The case would be analogous to nuclear proliferation treaty. Thus, a new restrictive regime on space weapon is likely to follow, which will foreclose India's option for testing any ASAT capability thereafter. A case will be similar to nuclear apartheid, which India faced consequent to the nuclear test we did. Therefore, in my appreciation is the urgency. What's the way ahead? Indian space program is no match for Chinese space program. Hence, India should go in for ASAT technology for a potent and credible deterrence against China to gain asymmetric advantages. And thereafter, we should work towards creating Indian space security architecture. By this, I mean there are a lot of blocks dealing with space security which needs to be designed, developed and put to place to cater for a comprehensive security, both offensive and defensive. When I say Indian space security architecture, I intend it would be India's military requirement in space for the 21st century. They will include offensive component, which could be the kinetic kill energy vehicle, that is ASAT, which I discussed, the co-orbital ASATs, laser ASAT system, cruise missiles, IRBMs, space mining, wherein India did develop a capability in single rocket, they have been launching multiple satellites. And coming to defensive components, that is RISAT for surveillance, IRNSS, the regional navigation satellite system which India wants to develop for independent PNT system, so that the dependency on GPS or Galileo or GLONASS is not there. Similarly, Gagan system is being developed for airspace surveillance and traffic management. Communication-centric intelligence satellite is being developed for the C4 component of C4ISR, which should be somewhere operational in 2014-15. Naval satellite for int and tactical communication is already in the offing. Effort should also be there for defense communication network for secure communication. Apparently, Air Force, Army and Navy individual communication systems are getting linked to have network of networks, and this would be through satellite base, thereby giving a secure communication to the armed forces, which will be integrated. We also need a robust space situational awareness network to keep a track of satellites and other offensive capabilities which perhaps the adversaries could launch against us. BMD is already shaping up for air defense. So to conclude, to me and so apparently to all my friends from military background, offense would be the best defense. And towards that, the demonstrated deterrence is a capable deterrence. That is why it is necessary as of now. And India's kinetical energy asset would be a strategic balance in the space on over Asian region. And to have a strategic balance is a necessity today. India's offensive space capabilities will ensure a credible and a potent deterrence against China. Hence, a secure aerospace for India to protect its national interest and propel its economic activities way beyond 21st century, thereby making India a leading world power. I've finished. Thank you.